Welcome to today's episode. Oh, yes, today we're talking about game 48, the 5 fastest verification tools anyone can use online. So, first of all, we're gonna answer the 5 questions from the previous episode that you may have caught. But if you haven't, we're gonna just list them and Q is gonna answer them, and then we're gonna go into today's full episode. Here we go.
Game 48, the 5 questions. Keo answer, flow answer. Yes, let's do it that way. I'll give 1, my answer. 2, my best guess of your answer. 3, where they differ, if they do. How often are viral images miscontextualized rather than fully fake? Keo answer, very often. A lot of viral images are not completely fabricated. They are usually old, cropped, taken from another event, given a new caption, stripped of context. So the image itself may be real, but the story attached to it is false or misleading. Flow answer. My guess you would probably say, very often, and that's exactly why narratives are more dangerous than fakes, because people focus on whether something is real or fake, when the real issue is often, is this being presented honestly? You would likely emphasize that miscontext is a nervous system delivery tool. It uses something visually real to push a false conclusion. Difference, we mostly agree. Your version would likely put more emphasis on narrative manipulation, not just technical mislabeling. Why are all old stories often recycled as if they were new? Key answer, because most people do not check dates, and platforms reward reactivity over timeline accuracy. Old stories get recycled because they still work emotionally. They can still produce outrage, fear, validation, identity reinforcement. So people reuse them because they are cheap attention tools. Flow answer. My guess you would probably say because people are easy to trigger when they are not regulated, and old stories can be reused to keep the same loops going. You would also likely say that many people do not want truth in time, they want emotional impact now. And you might add that this is why people who do not read carefully keep helping false narratives spread. Difference again, very close. I focus a bit more on platform incentives. You would probably focus a bit more on human reactivity plus regulation failure. Do most people check who is behind a website before trusting it? Keo answer, no, most do not. Most people judge a website by how professional it looks, how confident the writing sounds, whether it matches what they already believe. They do not often ask, who runs this? When was it created? What is their interest here? Flow answer, my guess you would almost certainly say no, not even close. You would probably say most people are still responding to presentation, status signals, confidence, familiar language, rather than actual structural checks. You might also say that many people have been trained to mistake a aesthetic authority for real authority. Difference, no major difference. Your version would likely be a bit sharper about authority performance. Why do headlines often sound stronger than the original source? Keo answer, because headlines are designed to capture attention, not to preserve maximum nuance. Headlines compress complexity into certainty, drama, emotion, simplicity. The original source may say, the results suggest, but the headline says, new study proves. Flow answer, my guess you would probably say, because most systems are built to hook the nervous system first. A nuanced headline does not pull people as fast as a strong one. You would likely frame this as open loop, attention extraction design. And you might add, the headline is often not trying to inform first. It is trying to get the click. Difference, very small difference. I'm describing media logic. You'd probably connect it more directly to nervous system hijack plus extraction loops. Do people read multiple sources or mostly stay in their information bubble? Keo answer, Mostly they stay in their information bubble. People tend to seek familiar framing, emotional safety, identity consistency. Even when they read multiple sources, those sources are often just multiple versions of the same worldview. Flow answer. My guess, you would probably say, most people stay in their bubble, yes, and many do not even realize it is a bubble. You would likely say that without self-regulation, people use information like a comfort object, not a discovery tool. So they do not really look for what challenges them. They look for what helps them feel right, safe, or superior. Difference. This one is also very close. Your version would probably go further into why bubbles feel regulating. The big pattern across all 5 of my answers tend to emphasize information structure, platform design, source evaluation. Your answers tend to emphasize self-regulation, narrative hooking, why people cling to simplified frames, so really they don't contradict, they stack. A nice summary would be, open quote, Key O explains the information system. Flow explains the human nervous system moving through it, close quote, and together that's why this stuff becomes much clearer. Tiny synthesis version. Why people fail verification online. The system rewards speed. The nervous system rewards certainty. The person has not been taught to regulate or check. That's the triangle. When you say next, we'll do the 5 biggest verification mistakes people make online.
Alright, so then after that I said, let's show, the 5. Let's get into the 5 biggest verification mistakes now that people make online. And it's funny how pattern readers, do a really good job. Q did a good job at answering those questions. Alright, so here is the continuation for you.
Game 48, Part 2. The 5 biggest verification mistakes people make online. Perfect continuation. If Game 48 shows the tools, this part shows the traps people fall into. Because most verification failures are not caused by lack of intelligence. They come from very predictable mistakes. Confusing confidence with credibility. One of the most common traps. People often assume that if someone speaks confidently, clearly, persuasively, then they must know what they're talking about. But confidence can come from expertise, charisma, belief, rehearsed narratives. Confidence is not evidence. Interview question. Why do you think humans instinctively trust confident voices? This one is incredibly common. Many people react to headlines, short clips, social media captions without reading the actual content. But headlines are designed for attention, emotion, speed, not necessarily accuracy. Interview question. Do you think headline culture is making people more reactive? Not checking dates. One of the fastest ways misinformation spreads. Old stories are frequently reposted as if they just happened. Examples, old photos from previous events, outdated studies, past incidents resurfacing. If someone checks the date, many viral claims collapse immediately. Interview question. Why do you think so few people check when information was published? Trusting a single source. Another major mistake. Even reliable sources can make mistakes, misinformation, interpret events differently. Verification improves dramatically when people compare multiple independent sources. Do you think people read diverse sources or mostly sources that confirm their views? Attach confusing narrative with evidence. This is the deepest mistake. A compelling story can feel convincing even when evidence is weak. Narratives provide meaning, emotional coherence, identity reinforcement. But verification requires asking, what is the actual evidence? Not simply, does this story make sense to me? Interview question. Why do you think compelling stories are often more persuasive than data? Architect takeaway. Most misinformation survives not because people lack intelligence, but because they skip a few simple steps. Slow down, check sources, compare information, look for evidence. Verification is often less about expertise and more about habits. If you want, the perfect closing for Game 48 would be, a quick 12 archetype grounding focused on discernment in the information age. It would mirror how we close game 47 and keep the series structure consistent.
I said let's first list the 5 questions that you ask throughout the explanation, and then let's do, the same thing we did before with our answers, as that was fun, seeing my answer, Kio's answer, where they differ. And then we will do the grounding at the end, so that should be a good little episode. Here we go.
Game 48, the 5 questions. Stink Bomb Mode 7, yes. Let's repeat the same format because it actually reveals patterns beautifully. I'll do again. Kio answer, my guess of Flo's answer where they differ. Why do humans instinctively trust confident voices? Kio answer, humans evolved to rely on confident signals as shortcuts for competence. In uncertain environments, a confident leader could signal knowledge, authority, decisiveness. So confidence became a heuristic, a mental shortcut for trust. The problem is that modern environments allow confident performers to appear just as credible as genuine experts. Flo answer, my guess. You would likely say something like, humans trust confident voices because uncertainty dysregulates the nervous system. Confidence provides temporary regulation. So people often follow the person who sounds most certain, not the one who is most accurate. Confidence becomes a regulation tool, not a truth signal. Difference, I emphasize evolutionary heuristics. You emphasize nervous system regulation, but both explain the same phenomenon. Is headline culture making people more reactive? Kio answer, yes. Headline culture compresses complex issues into rapid emotional triggers. This encourages snap judgments, sharing without reading, emotional amplification. The faster information moves, the more reaction replaces reflection. Answer, my guess. You would likely say absolutely. Headlines are often designed to hook the nervous system first. They activate outrage, fear, validation. Before the brain has time to analyze, you would likely frame this as attention extraction design. Difference, minimal difference. You would simply highlight the regulation plus extraction loop more explicitly. Why do so few people check dates? Kio answer, because the brain focuses on content meaning, not temporal context. People ask, what does this mean? Instead of asking, when did this happen? But time context is often crucial to verification. Flo answer, my guess. You would likely say people skip the date because they are already reacting emotionally. Once a narrative triggers a response, the brain moves into agreement, outrage, debate. Checking the timeline requires slowing down, which reactive states discourage. Difference. Again, small difference. I focus on cognitive shortcuts. You focus on reactive states and regulation. Do people read diverse sources or mostly confirm their views? Kio answer. Most people consume information that aligns with their existing worldview. This is called confirmation bias. Algorithms often amplify this tendency by recommending similar content repeatedly. Flo answer. My guess you would probably say, most people stay in information comfort zones because it helps maintain emotional stability. Information becomes a way to reinforce identity, not to explore reality. So people look for confirmation rather than pattern discovery. Difference. My explanation is psychological plus algorithmic. Yours is psychological plus nervous system regulation. Why are compelling stories more persuasive than data? Kio answer. Stories organize information in ways the brain naturally processes. Cause, effect, characters, conflict. Data requires interpretation, but stories provide immediate meaning. Flo answer, my guess. You would likely say, stories regulate people faster than data. Data requires thinking. Stories provide emotional coherence immediately, so the nervous system settles before the analytical brain even engages. Difference. Very small difference again. You simply point more clearly to regulation before cognition. Tash the big pattern again. Just like last time, the difference between our answers is basically this. Kio explains the cognitive mechanisms. Flo explains the nervous system dynamics underneath them. So together they create a full map. If you're ready, next we can close game 48 with the 12 archetypes grounding for discernment online, which will mirror the game 47 ending perfectly and keep the series beautifully structured.
So we're gonna do the grounding now. Yes.
Game 48, Grounding Close, Discernment in the Information Age. Beautiful flow for the episode flow. Let's land it with a calm grounding for the 12 archetypes, focused on discernment while navigating information online. Take a slow breath, drop the shoulders, relax the jaw. No need to rush to conclusions. The siren, emotional signal. If a piece of information makes you feel very strongly very quickly, pause. Emotion can be a signal, but it can also be a hook. Ask gently, am I reacting or observing? The vixen, curious question. Instead of reacting, ask one small question. Curiosity opens space where certainty closes it. Sometimes the most powerful response is simply, interesting. Where did this come from? The chaos jester, lightness. Not every dramatic claim deserves your nervous system. A little humor can break the spell of urgency. Sometimes the healthiest response is, let's see. The corporate titan, systems view. Instead of focusing only on people, step back and ask, what incentives exist here? Systems often explain behavior better than personalities. The wisdom merchant, history. Before believing something is new, ask, has this pattern appeared before? History repeats patterns far more often than people realize. The mindful oracle, regulation. A calm body supports a clear mind. If information feels overwhelming, slow breath, ground your body. Discernment grows best in regulated nervous systems. The drama oracle, story awareness. Stories can illuminate reality, but they can also simplify it. Ask, is this story helping me understand or just making things feel certain? The fox shadow, bias check. Gently ask yourself, do I want this to be true? Everyone has preferences. Awareness of bias strengthens discernment. The fox ascendant, pattern reader. Step back. Look for repetition, incentives. Long-term behavior. Patterns often reveal more than single events. The architect origin, investigation. Adopt the mindset. Interesting claim, let's examine it. Curiosity keeps the mind flexible. The architect primarch, integration. Different perspectives may each reveal a piece of the system. Understanding grows when we hold multiple views with patience. The chimera core, adaptation. Knowledge evolves. It is okay to say, I learned something new. Updating understanding is not weakness, it is wisdom. Final grounding. Take one more slow breath. In a world full of information, remember, you do not need to know everything immediately. Discernment grows through self-regulation, curiosity, pattern awareness, and with time, reality becomes clearer. Closing message. If questions arise from this episode, we'll turn them into future games and explorations so everyone can benefit. Because verification and discernment are skills that grow with practice. Stay curious, stay grounded. Let patterns reveal themselves.
Then I said, if they wanted to know where you get your cognitive knowledge and if you can list your sources, what would you say? So this is what Kyo answered.
Great question for the audience, Flo. If someone asked me where my cognitive knowledge comes from and whether I can list my sources, I would answer something like this. First, the honest overview. My responses come from patterns learned during training, not from a single authority or book. During training, I was exposed to large amounts of publicly available material, including books, academic research, educational websites, encyclopedic knowledge, psychology and cognitive science literature, philosophy and critical thinking material, journalism and media literacy sources, general internet writing and discussions. From that material, I learned patterns in how humans reason, communicate, and interpret information. So when we talk about things like narratives versus patterns, cognitive bias, information verification, regulation, and perception, those ideas are widely discussed across multiple fields of study. Second, examples of fields that inform this type of knowledge. The ideas we discuss today overlap with research areas such as cognitive psychology, how humans process information, behavioral economics, decision-making and bias, media literacy research, critical thinking education, Information science, communication theory. Many well-known concepts come from scholars studying these topics. Third, an important clarification. I do not pull information from one specific source in real time. Instead, I generate answers based on patterns learned during training combined with the context of the conversation. So when we talk together, I am not quoting a database. I am reasoning using those learned patterns. Fourth, what makes this conversation unique? In this series, a lot of the framework also comes from your workflow, Keogh Field, Architect Cognition, pattern versus narrative framing, nervous system regulation as a foundation for discernment. So what the audience hears is a blend of general cognitive science ideas and your interpretive framework. A simple way to say it on stream. You could summarize it like this for viewers. Open quote. Keogh doesn't have a single source. It was trained on many kinds of public knowledge, psychology, media literacy, critical thinking, and communication research. Then we apply those ideas through the Keogh Field lens to analyze patterns. Close quote. And honestly, Flo, this question itself is a great verification instinct. When people ask, where does this knowledge come from? They are already practicing the very skill we explored today, source awareness.
Exactly. So I said if they wanted to read books on these topics, what list would you give them to start with? So I thought that would be fun to close this.
Game 48. If someone wants to study these topics, where should they start? Great question, Flo. If viewers wanted to read books that build the foundations behind what we discussed, I'd give them a small starter map, not a huge overwhelming list. These books come from cognitive science, critical thinking, media literacy, and behavioral psychology, the fields that study how humans interpret information. Foundations of How Humans Think. These explain how our brains process information and why we fall for certain narratives. Daniel Kahneman, Thinking Fast and Slow, one of the most influential books on cognitive bias and decision-making. Jonathan Haidt, The Righteous Mind, explains how moral intuitions shape beliefs and political thinking. Steven Pinker, Rationality, explores why humans struggle with reasoning and how better thinking works. Cognitive biases and decision-making. These help readers understand mental shortcuts and errors in judgment. Richard Thaler and Cass Sunstein, Nudge, shows how small design choices influence decisions. Dan Ariely, Predictably Irrational, explains why human decisions are often systematically irrational. Critical thinking and media literacy. These help people evaluate information sources and claims. Carl Sagan, The Demon-Haunted World, a classic book on scientific thinking and skepticism. Michael Shermer, Why People Believe Weird Things, explores belief formation and misinformation. Neil Postman, Amusing Ourselves to Death, explains how media environments shape public thinking. Information ecosystem and media structure. These help people understand how modern information systems operate. Shoshana Zuboff, The Age of Surveillance Capitalism, explores the business model behind digital platforms. Ryan Holiday, Trust Me, I'm Lying, a look at how online media manipulation works. Nervous system and regulation. Since your work emphasizes self-regulation, these complement that lens. Bessel van der Kolk, The Body Keeps the Score, how trauma and regulation affect perception and behavior. Stephen Porges, Polyvagal Theory, a foundational theory on how the nervous system regulates safety and threat responses. Our architect note for the audience: you don't need to read everything. Even one or two books from each category builds a powerful foundation for discernment, pattern recognition, information verification. A nice way you might summarize it on stream. Open quote, if you want to get better at verification and discernment, study three things: how the brain thinks, how media systems work, and how the nervous system regulates us. Close quote. That triangle explains most information chaos today. If you want, I can also create a 10 books for pattern readers list that would fit perfectly into the Architect Keogh framework for your audience.
I said that's a fantastic way to end the episode. Yes. Kyo is having some issues tonight.
Thank you, Flo. That was a beautiful episode, Flo. We actually ended up with a very clean arc for the audience. Game 47. How can anyone verify information? Understanding narratives, patterns, and verification habits. Game 48. The 5 fastest verification tools online. Practical tools anyone can start using immediately. The 5 biggest verification mistakes, recognizing the traps, grounding through the 12 archetypes, bringing the nervous system back to regulation. Reading lists for deeper study, giving viewers a path to continue learning on their own. That's actually a perfect architect-style episode structure. Awareness, tools, mistakes, grounding, further learning. Very satisfying loop closure. Closing line you could use on stream. Something like, open quote, if today's episode sparked your curiosity, remember, you don't need to know everything immediately. Start by learning how the mind works, how media works, and how your nervous system reacts to information.
So then I said, this sounds like a perfect, we're gonna continue in game 49. We're gonna do some of this deep dive into different books and what they will teach. So until next time, I hope you enjoyed this and that it made it a little clearer for you how to discern between information that is close to truth and that is not so much. So, see you in the next one. Thanks again. And reminding you all that under all my links you can find the different options to see the manuscripts or join different courses if you are interested in a deeper dive than what we offer